You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll examine the announcement by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and Unite Here of their desire to help UFC fighters unionize and what this could mean for the entire sport of mixed martial arts. Big John and I will also discuss the highly contentious split decision win by Beneil Dariush over Michael Johnson in the co-main event at last Saturday's UFC Fight Night 73 in Nashville, Tennessee. Plus, I'll tell you about a highly unusual occurrence that I witnessed at an MMA show in Wichita, Kansas this past Saturday, and we'll reveal the strangest things that we've ever seen at the fights. And as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. So ask away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. So the International Brotherhood of Teamsters through Local 986, which covers Southern California and Nevada, and Unite Here through their Nevada branch, Culinary Workers Union Local 226, have come together to launch an initiative with the stated goal to, quote, organize MMA fighters and the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The UFC responded with an email sent to all of their contracted fighters, written by Chief Legal Officer Kirk Henrik, which calls this effort, quote, shameful and pathetic. Wow, John, right now this is a pretty quiet story, but I think this could actually explode into a huge story.
This is going to get a lot bigger. You're going to see a whole lot more coming from just this simple, just what they're trying to do. You know, you look at it, and when he says shameful, I'm going to agree with him, and here's why I'm agreeing with him. You know what? Look at what they said. We're going to unionize the UFC fighters. I don't give a flippin' fuck if you unionize the UFC fighters. You want to unionize MMA fighters? Hey, let's talk. Great. But when you sit there and you segregate it to just one promotion, what are you saying? Are you going after that promotion? Congratulations. Go after that promotion. You've done it in the past, and you've done your little thing, and all of a sudden this group who has been screwing over fighters, if you want to really look at it, from the East Coast, especially New York, since they're the ones that have done all the work to keep the UFC out of New York and keep guys that live in that area from being able to fight in their home state. Now they're going to be the ones to come to the rescue, to be the guys that are going to unionize the UFC fighters. That's a bunch of crap. Talk to me about the sport of MMA. Don't talk to me about the UFC.
Well, John, you bring up an interesting point, because as I'm reading this story as it broke, my first thought was, all right, you're a contracted UFC fighter. You're released. Let's say you sign with Bellator, World Series of Fighting, or one championship. So what happens to your union membership? I guess it goes away.
No good. Come on, that's my whole point. That's the whole thing that I look at this and it's like, what are you doing? You don't sit there and unionize a certain promotion. You don't unionize the fighters out of one group. That doesn't do anything, because those guys are in and out of there. Very few guys are staying there for long periods of time. So obviously there's some. But, if you look at the majority, we got guys that are flowing into that promotion and then, being there for a couple years and flowing out and going somewhere else. And those are the people that need to have a union to protect them. Those are the guys that need to have a union for medical. Those are the guys that need to have a union for the things that a union is there for. You want to sit there and protect the guys that are actually making the money and stuff. You're not doing anybody any favors.
So let's get into, John, these two organizations, the Teamsters and Unite Here. And I think we need to go deeper into what Kirk Henrik of the UFC is saying because of all the efforts by these two groups to keep the UFC out of New York. We've talked about that extensively here on Let's Get It On. It's a lot more in New York than just, oh, we don't like professional mixed martial arts. It goes a lot deeper than that, and it really goes to the heart of this, the Teamsters and Unite Here.
You know, it's flat out, this is about politics, and this is the union, the Vegas Culinary Union, who has a freaking hair up their ass. I'm just going to say it the way it is about Lorenzo Fertitta, Frank Fertitta, and the station casinos. They have been trying to unionize any of the station casinos now for the last 20-some years, and it hasn't worked for them. And hey, that's the choice of the workers of the station casinos. If those people want to unionize, they're going to be able to unionize, but they keep on obviously saying, you know what? No, we like what we have. We think we're doing good without paying union dues, and we're going to leave ourselves in this non-union environment. That's called freedom of choice. That's great. That's the way it's supposed to be. And so they keep on losing in the state of Nevada against the station casinos as far as getting them unionized. Now they go and they start interfering with other things outside of it just to try to get at the Fertittas. They start going after the UFC in New York because New York is a huge union state. And, you know, we're talking about, look at you, if you go to, you know, Madison Square Garden, you can't change that light bulb. A union guy's got to change it. Or you can't move that box. A union guy's got to change it. And that's fine. That's the way it is. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with unions. I like unions. My son works for a union. But the whole thing is they need to be in place and doing the right things for what they're there for, and that's for their employees, their members. And when you get into what the Culinary Union of Vegas has done, they've spent millions of dollars of their members' money trying to screw with the UFC. You know, that's ridiculous. You're wasting your members' money. What you need to be doing is doing things that benefit your members. And as far as I know, culinary has a lot to do with food and cooking and maybe even eating, if you want to say. And so, yeah, MMA fighters eat, but you know what? I don't think that that's really what's going on here. They're trying to get things done just to screw with, you know, a couple of guys and a group, you know, that's from Vegas. And what they've done is it's harmed the sport. It's harmed fighters in that state, you know, that do the sport. And you look at everything they're doing, and now they're going to come and I'm the white knight riding in on the horse, and we're going to unionize UFC fighters. I look at that statement and it just absolutely galls me. The fact that, you know, you sit there and you go, oh, UFC fighters. You know what? I have talked with union representatives about unionizing MMA fighters. That's what should be done if it's done. And that should also be the decision of those MMA fighters. Not every MMA fighter is going to want to be part of the union. And you know what? I don't think they should. I think it should be allowed that, you know, the ones that want to become part of the union, they become part of the union. And if you don't, then you don't become part of it and you don't get the benefits of it, and then you don't pay into certain things, and that's fine, and you're on your own. But not everyone is in a position where that union is going to benefit them.
John, when you were a police officer, LAPD, I'm guessing you were part of a union. Is that right?
You know, we had our protective league, but that's a union that it doesn't have any power at all. You know, we can't strike. We couldn't do those things. They would, you know, work at basically negotiating your new contracts and stuff. But you know what? They didn't have any power. And they were all police officers who were elected to that spot. And then basically that was the job that they did instead of, you know, being a police officer. And, you know, let's be honest. There are strong unions out there and there are weak unions out there. But the whole point of having a union is so everyone together, hopefully, becomes stronger and has more of a voice and has more, you know, that they can go to as a backing when something is being done wrong to them. If it's being done wrong, there's someone there to help them and stand by them. That's what a union's for. That's what I believe in. But that's not what's going. That's not even what they said in this whole thing about we're going to unionize one group.
Well, the reason I ask, the closest experience I have to unions, my mom is a retired public school art teacher, and there was a teachers union, and she was in it and she was not in it. And she left it because, like what you're describing with LAPD, she didn't feel they really did anything, but it wasn't mandatory. To me, if you're unionizing MMA or the UFC or any or any type of sanctioning body or promotional body in combat sports, there's got to be a will. There's got to be a reason why everyone's in. Now, in the National Football League, for instance, or Major League Baseball, you're not given a choice. When you sign your contract, you are de facto a union member. Your union dues are getting paid regardless. But do you leave it optional? And if you did go outside of the UFC, I'm asking hypothetically, what about the guys who fight on mom and pop local shows who fight 4 times a year for $1,500 and $1,500?
And that's the whole point.
Why would they pay union dues?
Well, that's what's not. They're the ones that want to pay union dues, and I don't blame them. They're the ones that a union is going to be doing, the most for. In the fact that if you're part of the union, hopefully you're getting medical insurance, hopefully you're getting dental, hopefully you're getting some type of, depending upon how much you put in, you work long enough, you work towards a retirement. That's what a union's about, and that's awesome. I love that, and I think it's fantastic. But this is the problem when you have the disparity you have in MMA as far as what people are making. It's easy to sit there and talk about the UFC fighters because you get a Ronda Rousey, you get a Conor McGregor, you get a John Jones, you get some of those people. They don't need a union. They don't want a union because they're young. They've got the world by the balls basically. And that union's not going to do anything for them. In fact, all the union's going to do is be a pain in their butt. And the union's going to take money from them. And the union's going to do these things that does nothing for that level of fighter. The union's going to help the lesser fighter. They're going to help that mom and pop fighter because that fighter's going to get stuff that they never would have gotten. And that's the whole thing. And that's the balance that you have to put into this. And so you look at those fighters, in the UFC and say, does a John Jones, does a Ronda Rousey, does a Conor McGregor, does a Jose Aldo want to be part of a union? I doubt it. I really doubt it. And they're at a different level and they're at a different point in their life where they're all young fighters. If you took a Randy Couture back in the day when a 40-some-year-old fighter, Randy might have been the guy to say, although I'm making money and I'm doing well, I think this is important for everyone. He's the kind of guy that, I could see him saying, yes, I'll be part of that union to benefit other fighters. But that's a special person that's going to sit there and say, I'm going to take one for the team to try to get this going for everyone because I think it's what's important. You're not going to get that from a lot of young fighters because it's not benefiting them in any fashion. So why do they want to do it?
Every week here on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can, of course, cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. This week's poll question, do you favor a union for UFC fighters? Let us know what you think. Vote yes or no. Let's get it on podcast.com.
Okay, now John, put one out. Do you favor a union for MMA fighters? God dang it, that pisses me off for UFC fighters. I'm sorry.
Well, and the reason that we structure the question this week is that's what we're hearing in all the articles. It said UFC. There's been some backtracking now, and I think someone from Unite from Unite here, from the culinary workers, said, well, we want to look to all MMA. But if you look at the literature that they put out, they said UFC. I mean, again, I read the quote at the top of the show. That is a direct quote coming from them. They said, our stated goal is to, quote, organize MMA fighters in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. There's no ambiguity there.
No, there's not. And that's the whole point. That's the part that just galls me.
So, John, if you look, we talked about team sports in North America. Major League Soccer started with the Players Association. They're a union. NHL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NFL, all have unions. Again, you can't opt out. You sign your contract, you're in the union. But then if you look at tennis, the way men's and women's professional tennis is structured, they have a players association. They're not unionized, but they still come together. They're worrying about prize money, about schedule overload, dates, the way players are treated, transportation, hotel accommodations, meals. Maybe there's something in there, but that to me has got to come internally. That's got to be athletes getting together and say, all right, we think that there should be a baseline pay, or we think there should be baseline health insurance, dental, or the hotel standard has to be a certain thing. I don't think that can be created when you're bringing in, and no disrespect, Unite here or the Teamsters. To me, they're just kind of opposing ideas.
I agree with you totally. It's, this is a different situation. This is not like, if you take a look at the NFL and the way they do things and the NFL Players Association, you're looking at how many players are part of each team. Well, we got 32 teams and we have basically 53 people on the roster, and then we have certain people that are on the training team. And so let's say that we have a total of 60, all right? Well, you're talking a lot of people there that are part of the union, that have to be part of that union, and in their contract, it does say that, as a player that is contracted in the NFL, you will be part of the Players Association, and they take dues out of your pay, and that, it's a good chunk that they take out. It has to be. But all of this is based upon that team concept. There's players with teams, and you have representatives from the teams, as far as players on the teams that are the representatives for the union, and they talk to the union. You're not going to have that with MMA. It's just too fragmented, and they don't come together. And look at an NFL team practices in one location, and you get all those people together, and they can all talk. Well, MMA fighters, they're all in different gyms around the country and stuff. It's
around the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not what people think. It's a much more difficult situation to get a hold of than people can realize. And when you start, again, breaking this down to saying, well, we're going to cover one promotion, that's just not going to cut it. You're trying to do something with an agenda there. And you're using the fighters, in my opinion, this is what bothers me. You're using the fighters as your little tool to try to get at somebody. And you know what? You want to get at someone, go get at them. But don't use other people to do it.
John, final point on this. I think you and I agree that this story is going to get bigger, but do you see this as a tipping point where maybe a major athlete, past or present from the UFC, jumps on board and says, we need this? Do you think this could go in a different direction, or do you think this eventually just runs its natural course and Teamsters and Unite here have made a lot of noise and it's really all about Station Casino?
I'm looking at it, the truth is, there's an agenda about the station casinos, and that's where this comes from. I'm not saying that, there are fighters out there, you're looking at, the Brandon Veras and the John Fitch, Vanderlei Silva, Ryan Jimmo, they all came down to the ABC wanting to talk about, bringing certain things into the world of MMA. And that's fine. I'm all for, them having a voice and them being able to bring out their concerns and what they think needs to be done. That's awesome. But there needs to be where, if we have those fighters, all those fighters are obviously ex-UFC fighters. And, there's times when you're going to be happy with your promotion when you get, either at the end of your career, or if you're at the end of your, let's say, active career where you're actually being able to be productive. Sometimes you're going to like your promoter, and sometimes you're not going to like them. Things didn't always go your way as far as contracts or things like that. But if those fighters want to come out and try to do things for other fighters out there and try to make things better for the future fighters of the sport, I'm 100% behind them. But it's got to be about doing things that are benefiting the future of the sport, not trying to get at somebody because you're upset with what happened in the past.
That's extremely well said. Well, last Saturday, John, you were, of course, in Nashville, Tennessee, working as a referee for UFC Fight Night 73. I don't think there was really a controversy in any of your bouts, my friend, but a big controversy in the night's co-main event, refereed by Herb Dean. The controversy, though, not on Dean, but on the judges. A split decision win by Beneil Dariush over Michael Johnson. 29-28, 29-28 for Dariush, 29-28 for Johnson. Michael Johnson afterwards said what pretty much social media is saying uniformly, quote, everybody knows that I won that fight. There's no way that I could have lost. Well, there was a way he could have lost because two judges in Tennessee had it for Dariush, but point well taken from Michael Johnson.
Yeah, I'm telling you, sitting there watching the fight, I'm kind of judging it not the way I would if I was actually sitting in that chair, but I'm looking and, seeing, who I think is winning the round. And I'm talking with the other officials that are there, after the round and saying, this is what I saw. And, they're telling me what they saw. And for the most part, I thought that I thought it was very clear. Johnson won the first round. That it was pretty easy to understand because he landed the most effective blow in the round. He controlled the distance. He made the fight occur where he wanted it to be. He landed the better shots overall. I think he landed a couple more than even Dariush did. So I think the first round is pretty easy for you. The third round, I gave to Dariush, and a lot of people are like, but Johnson's going after him. It doesn't matter. He's going after him. He wasn't landing in the same manner that he was in the first round, and he was not as effective with what he was doing, and he was actually being countered fairly well. And I gave the third round to Dariush. So I think the real question was, who do you give the second round to? And that's what happens in MMA. It usually comes down to one round. Everyone can sit there and kind of agree, all right, this is definitely his round and this is definitely the other guy's round. And you get into that second round. While I was there, I thought that's an easy round, that's Johnson's round. And when I came home and I watched it, the round was actually closer than I remembered it. And looking at it, just the way I judged the fight, I still would have given the round to Johnson. I thought Johnson landed the better shots. He landed more of them. Although Dariush had his moments where he actually was doing well, he landed a couple of good shots. He missed a lot of the things that he threw. And when you look at it, the real problem is you have commentators, and commentators are going to go the way they're going to go. Yep. But especially, you got Rashad Evans, who he's a teammate of Michael Johnson. He works out with him on a daily basis. He cares about who wins. And he's sitting on the UFC's broadcast for Fox saying, this is horrible. I can't believe how anyone, and he's just blatantly putting out that, Michael Johnson just steamrolled Dariush in that fight. He did not. Let's just make it clear. He did not steamroll anybody. It was a close fight. And although Michael's going forward, that's great. He can go forward. Although Michael is controlling the ring, that's great. But those are the last two things that we will only use as a judge when I can't tell who won off of striking and grappling. And basically, there wasn't any grappling in that. So it's all striking that we're judging it off of. And it's who lands the better strikes, who lands the most effective strikes, who does the damage if there's any damage done in the round. That's what the judge is going off of.
John, I've watched the fight twice. The first time I watched it, well, I was at MMA with my daughter Ellie, which we'll talk about later in this program, on Saturday night in Wichita on a local show. So I watched it on Sunday when I got home, and I just watched it to watch it. And then this morning, right before we went on air for this broadcast, I watched it again and I scored it using the training that you taught me, that Rob Hines taught me. I had it exactly the way you had it. 29-28 in favor of Johnson. Definitely round one. Close, but I gave him round two, and I thought Dariush won round three. I know what gets in the fighters' heads, though, what they have a very difficult time understanding. If they win a clear cut, a dominant 10-9, not a 10-8, but a dominant 10-9, and then the other two rounds are very close, but they lose those. They're very, very close. They think, how could I have lost that fight? I killed my opponent in round number one. But, of course, and John, you were just talking about it at the ABC, and it confused a lot of people in the room. You judge every round standalone in a bubble. You don't worry about what happened before or later. And I think fighters have a really difficult time understanding that mindset, that philosophy.
They do. They don't get it. They think that, look at the whole fight. The judge is looking at this thing round by round. That's all they can do. And whatever happened in the prior round, once that bell rings, it's over. I don't bring it into the next round. It doesn't matter. It's all what occurs to me in this round. And a lot of fighters need to understand, the fact that they are controlling where the fight is going to be. Michael Johnson controlled that fight as far as it being on the feet. Dariush tried to take him down multiple times in the fight. Let's say 6 to 9 times. I'm not going to go back and count, but he tried to take him down a bunch. And each time, Johnson sprawled, pushed him away, and kept the fight in the area that he wanted to keep it. And that's awesome. That's great for Michael Johnson. But in the mind of the judge, there's no credit that's going to Johnson for doing that, in the fact that he didn't land punches coming out of it. So he sprawls, he's defending. Dariush is attempting an offensive maneuver. It doesn't work, and we're back to even. And so all of that Johnson is saying, I kept it on the feet. Congratulations, you kept it where you wanted the fight to be. If Dariush takes him down, okay, then Dariush is putting the fight where he wants it to be, but he's got to do something with it to get the judge's credit also. So everything is about what lands in a legal area and how much effect does it have on the fighter. And, when you're watching the fight, you do watch it as the judge. It's from different angles. And people just don't understand the fact that the judge is sitting in one spot. And, I'm going to say, the UFC and where they put the judges, sometimes it's not the best spot because two of the judges are sitting by the gate, which has more poles and more padding and more things to block a vision of a judge than, sitting there as you're watching on the screen with nothing. Now, they do have the monitor there, but they're not supposed to look at the monitor until that fight gets to a location where it's difficult for them to see what's occurring. Now put your eyes down to the monitor. So when they're watching the fight, everyone thinks that, you get this best view, and sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, and sometimes you don't have a great view. Sometimes, as the best punch of the round is just occurring, the referee is walking right in front of the judge's view, and he doesn't even see it. He hears a reaction of the crowd, but he doesn't actually see the blow that lands, and all he can go off of is what he sees. So there's a dichotomy to it as far as, we try to give the judge the best view. Sometimes he does have the best view. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes they're going to miss things. And those things that are missed are possibly what's going to change their score as far as who they're going to give that round to.
And John, you touched on this a few moments ago, and this is something that I think fighters and trainers and fans and media have a tough time with. There is a stacked criteria when you're scoring, and I love the UFC, but I think it's misleading when they start their broadcast. They give the criteria like you just throw it all in a blender. It is a stacked criteria. You go down.
I hate when they put that stupid thing up there. It's the stupidest thing ever, and it misleads all the fans.
It's completely misleading. It's effective striking / effective grappling, number one. You don't consider things like cage control, or they call it octagon control, or aggression or moving forward or anything until you first consider those two factors. And only then, almost like in a tiebreaker fashion, you move down the line. So you hear fighters, oh, I was coming forward. I was more aggressive. I really controlled. How was the effective striking? How is the effective grappling? Don't worry about anything else.
There you go. And that's as simple as it can get for the fighter. They need to understand, there's two elements that make up a fight. If you have two guys this is when I teach, I demonstrate it. I got two guys that are in the middle of a cage, and I got one guy that's being aggressive, and he's coming forward, and he's got that mean look on his face, and the other guy is trying to control the ring, and he's trying to move around with nice movement, and all we have is dancing, and it's bad dancing. There's only two elements in that whole thing that make up actual fighting. That's striking and grappling. That's what the judge should be giving their criteria off of.
Hopefully, John, we're doing our best. We're doing our part to clarify. But, it's just part of the sport. It's indicative of our sport that people are going to complain on the judging. Fighters complain. Commentators complain. We have social media. It just is what it is, but it's an intrinsic part of the sport now. It seems like at least once a month on a big show, somebody got robbed. The judges are corrupt. The judges are incompetent. That's just where we are in MMA and in boxing.
And, look at the whole point is we're going to have fights where, the majority of the people think the judges got it wrong, and they could be right. The people are right, and sometimes they're wrong. And it's not an easy job, and it's not going to benefit everyone as far as, everyone's going to be happy. They're not. This is, that's why it's called a judge's decision. Doesn't mean that it's 100% correct. And I think it just means that it's the best thing that we have to go off to say who's the winner. I can tell you, I've done fights on shows where they say, okay, we're not going to have any judges. And if it goes to the end of the third round, then it's a draw. And we have one fighter basically dominate another fighter for 3 rounds, beat the piss out of him, and then I hold up both fighters' hands, and the people in the crowd go nuts booing because they're not happy. You're never going to make everyone happy.
And I think the takeaway from the Dariush Johnson fight is you and I both think that Johnson won, but we also think that he won by a very close margin, that it was probably 29-28. This isn't a dominant 30-27 or 30-25 score. Maybe the reaction, social media, fans, even Johnson himself, maybe it's a little overplayed.
A little bit, you got, you have Dana basically saying that, he got robbed. And as soon as Dana says something, everyone's jumping on that. Oh, he got robbed. Dana White said he got robbed. Well, Dana's watching as a fan, and I can understand why Dana thought Johnson won. And I'm going to be right there with him. I thought Johnson won too, just off of watching it. But I can understand where the judges are looking at it and giving Dariush the second round. Sal D'Amato is the judge that gave it to Johnson, and we talked about it, and he looked at it the same way I did, and he was giving credit for what I was giving credit for. But each judge, although we try to get them all to be the same, they're going to end up in some ways valuing one thing more than the other person, and that value is what ends up turning their decision to give the score to one guy over the next. And that's just part of human nature.
Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions, which this week come from listeners in 3 continents. And John and I will tell you about the oddest things that we've ever witnessed while refereeing fights. And John, I think mine just might top yours. It is the eyes wide shut version of a local boxing event. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock, and you are listening to Let's Get It On. It's the book the Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back. Pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now, online at ascendbooks.com, and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50. Hey, this is Sean Wheelock.
And this is Big John McCarthy.
If you're a fan of our show, then you're going to love the rest of the Ignotainment podcast lineup.
Like the Ocho Man behind the 8 Ball and the Whiskey Philosopher with Jeff Cooper.
You can find these great podcasts and more at ignotainment.com. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of the program.
Let's get it on!
When looking for new and exciting clothing concepts, look no further than Lambs to Lions. Lambs to Lions has great designs that incorporates the past from boxing with the new and exciting evolution of MMA. We all start out as lambs, but with time, training, and hard work, we can all become lions. Be part of the Lambs to Lions movement and check out all of their great designs. You can get your Lambs to Lions gear at the Las Vegas Fight Shop or go to lambstolionsbrand.com.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Every week on this podcast, Big John and I answer your questions. You can submit them via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Ask whatever you'd like. All we ask of you, please include a pronunciation guide for your name. First up, from Finland, John, and to be cheeky, he did not include a pronunciation guide for his name, but he did include this note that he wants me to mangle it for comedic value. Well, Mikko, I have called fights in Helsinki when I was at M1. We had Team Finland, so I believe it's Mikko Ruskola from Finland. I think that's pretty good. I don't know if I mangled that or not. You got the Kansas accent on your Finnish
Mikko
name.
Ruskola.
Either way. So Mikko asked, I've been a longtime fan of both kickboxing and Glory. However, in Glory, it seems the referees don't often give the fighters the 5 seconds to clinch. They should be given before breaking them off, if the rules are to be believed. Why is this? Are the referees just too into the moment and forget how long 5 seconds is, or is there something else behind this? It's great, and the timing's great, because on Friday in Las Vegas, you refereed Glory.
I did. Miko is misinterpreting what the glory rules are, because in glory, a clinch, any clinch is a foul. That's the way they look at it. But they will allow the fighter to clinch in an attempt to throw a knee that is damaging. If it is not damaging right away, the referee, as the clinch occurs, is supposed to be moving towards the fighters, looking at the knee and saying, if it is damaging, I'll let it go. And I can let it go with another damaging knee, followed by another damaging knee, up to 5 seconds. But as soon as one of those knees, in that referee's opinion, is not damaging, be it the first one or the fifth one, it is supposed to be stopped, and the fighters are supposed to be separated. So it's not that the fighters can clinch up to 5 seconds. As soon as they clinch, they have 5 seconds. That's not the way the glory rules are. The glory rules are that the clinch itself is a foul, and the referee is supposed to be immediately separating the fighters unless the fighter attacks with that knee, which is a damaging knee. Now we'll let it go to see if the next one is going to be damaging also.
I refereed one Muay Thai event. We used glory rules. It was the only Muay Thai, it was June of last year, that's ever happened in Kansas. I called you and Rob Hines afterwards. I said, man, that was tough. That was a lot tougher than boxing. And that's where I struggled the most, was in that exact situation that Miko was asking us about.
Yeah, and this is, it's a great question by Miko, because there's confusion with fans. They don't understand it. I do a lot of boxing here in California, and I let guys fight on the inside. I'll do Muay Thai, and if the guy's got a clinch, I'm going to let him work that clinch and let him work to try to off balance and do damage with knees and elbows. Obviously, glory doesn't have elbows, but the part of glory is they want separation of the fighters. They want the fighters to fight at a distance to where the strikes are the damaging element. They don't want these guys holding on to each other. That is exactly what they don't want. They want the referees quickly to be separating the fighters to make the fighters have distance so they can strike.
Next up, Marco Antonio from Brazil. This is a comment rather than a question, but excellent just the same. So Marco writes, in regards to the comments made on episode 18 of your program about fighters trying to be the big guys in lighter weight classes, I'd like to share my perspective as a small-frame jiu-jitsu fighter. For a long time, we had guys using that trick at local smaller jiu-jitsu tournaments and championships. A fighter on the low end of the weight spectrum would sign up for the category immediately below his weight class. Back then, weigh-ins would happen 1 or 2 days before the event, which they would use to regain some of that weight in order to have an edge over us smaller-framed guys. These days, after multiple complaints from fighters, the events now have weigh-ins on tournament day. This is where I think it gets really interesting, John. So he continues, it's of course a major pain in the ass because you arrive at about 9 a.m. and have to wait at least 2 hours before things begin to take shape. And by that time you have to enter the mat, you're already hungry or slightly dehydrated. But on the flip side, you have a more evened out event. It's really an interesting perspective.
It's a true perspective. And, no matter what, whether it's in, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, MMA, you're always going to get guys trying to push the envelope of being, again, the big guy in a smaller weight class. They think that's going to be of a benefit to them. And it's going to happen. The problem is you can't sit there and do the same things. He's sitting there saying that in that jiu-jitsu tournament, the whole thing is they have basically made it, day of weigh-ins, which I think is great. I love that for jiu-jitsu. There's a huge difference in the fact that a jiu-jitsu match, I hate to say, a lot of guys in jiu-jitsu say, oh, I've got to fight. That's not a fight. It's a grappling match. It's jiu-jitsu. It's competition, no doubt about it, but you're not punching, kicking, or elbowing someone to the head. And that's the difference. And this is where MMA comes. And we have the problem when it comes to the weigh-ins is we need guys to rehydrate. We need guys to have, that hydration in them where that blow to the head is not going to be what is something that's going to take and hurt them forever. In jiu-jitsu, you can have a guy that's dehydrated. He's not going to perform well. That's awesome. Too bad for him. He made a mistake. But he's not getting that point to where he's getting hit to the head that can cause him a life-altering incident off of the strike that occurs. So MMA is going to be different than a jiu-jitsu competition as far as what we can do with the weigh-in.
And this from Jason Beltran, and thanks for the pronunciation guide of your last name, Jason. So Jason asks, John, how many warnings would you give a fighter before deducting a point and then possibly disqualifying them for not following your warnings?
Well, it just depends on the situation. You say, how many warnings are you going to give? We give warnings all the time. Okay, you can take I just did the show in Tennessee, and then let's take a look at the Tom Watson versus Chris Camozzi fight. And if you actually go and I warned Tom Watson 4 times in that, as far as low blows, as far as hitting the groin area. Some of the times he was hitting it, he's sweeping his foot up in front, but he's got to be in control of his weapon. And I warned him multiple times over that space. And finally, he hits him with a blow that was a straight shot into the groin, lifted up and hurt Chris, and I ended up taking a point. Now, everything is about, again, the intent of the blow, but also the effect of the blow. And when you look and you say, how many warnings are there going to be? There is no, set number of, we must warn the fighter before. If the fighter does something and they do something in a fashion that is a game changer in the way the fight is, as far as who's competing and how fair it is for them, we can take that point right away to try to even the playing field. The reason I took a point in the Chris Camozzi versus Tom Watson thing was, I'm going to even this playing field, because at this moment, Camozzi has taken multiple shots and he is a lesser fighter. He's not in that same 90 percentile. He's down in the 82 or 78 percentile because of that blow, and I'm going to have to do something to try to help even this fight out because it was illegal. So it's not the amount of warnings we give. We can give warnings, and it's based upon how much effect the foul actually had in the fight. And then sometimes we won't give warnings at all because the effect had a great influence on the fight.
Keep your excellent questions and comments coming. Anything that you'd like to ask Big John and myself, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Well, this past Saturday, I attended the first ever MMA show promoted by my good friend and Bellator lightweight David Rickles, Evolution Fighting Championship in Wichita, Kansas, which I attended with my 10-year-old daughter, Ellie, who, by the way, collected the judges' scorecards for the Kansas Athletic Commission. The show was a big success, sold-out crowd, 10 really entertaining fights. Now, John, during the event, I saw something that I have never, ever seen at an MMA event before in person or on television. A bank of lights above the cage actually went completely dark during the first round of a fight. Thing I love more than anything else about local MMA, which you and I are both huge supporters of, expect the unexpected. You're almost always going to see something where you think, God, I thought I saw it all in this sport, and wow, there's something brand new.
Oh, my God. Bank of lights is nothing. I've had an entire arena go black in the middle of a fight. It happens. There's all types of, equipment failures that can occur. There's all types of, just structural failures as far as lighting towers, lights, the cage. I've seen those fall apart. I've seen a lot, and it's, thank God none of the cages have been on one that I've been doing, because I'm, as a referee, you're supposed to check those things. But it's a matter of, you will get lights that go out. I had a show, the entire arena went dark, and it happened just at a moment when one of the fighters had the other fighter in the deepest omoplata I had seen. There was no doubt in my mind it was going to end up stopping the fight, and all of the lights go out. It's dark, and there's one little light that comes on. It's an emergency light, so you can barely see. And I had to stop the fight and pull the fighters out of the position, which I hated to do, and wait for the lights to come back on. It took I think 11 minutes. And I took the fighters, put them back in the middle of the cage, put them back in the omoplata, and I kept telling the one guy, crank it more, right? And finally, fight, and the guy ends up getting out. Now, luckily, that fighter won the fight, but it's, these are the things that can happen, and we've got to work within, what is reasonable and what's fair as far as what we do for both fighters in trying to, alleviate that situation.
the referee in this fight, a really good up-and-coming referee in the state of Kansas, Nick Behrens. And the situation was, this venue was, for David Rickles' show, it was like a ballroom. It wasn't quite a ballroom, a hotel ballroom. It was like a ballroom, a place where you might have a prom or wedding reception. So they had the cage lights, and then they had ceiling lights, which were dark. So one bank of cage lights went out. The other lights were going. The fighters, I don't even think, noticed, oddly enough. And then between rounds 1 and 2, the venue turned on all of their lights. So it was just a different lighting perspective, probably not as fan-friendly, but the fight continued. What would you, though, say to John, to referees, and a lot listen to this show, if you have a lighting situation, a cage malfunction, something out of the ordinary that maybe you see once every 10 years?
You know, it all depends on the malfunction. If we have lighting that makes it where it's detrimental to the fighters as far as their ability to see has been diminished a great capacity, it's time to stop the fight. Stop the fight, put the fighters to their corners, and let's try to remedy the situation and get the fight going again as soon as we can. Obviously, it's not completely fair to one of the fighters if they have an advantage in the fight, but this is a point where with these, natural things occur and there's no, perfect answer for it. But you don't want people fighting in a situation where you say, well, they can't see each other. We don't let blind people fight. And so it doesn't matter if they're blind or if they can't see because of the lights. We can't let the fight go on. We've had situations, gloves have, broken or the padding pops out. And you've got that, and it's like, hey, you got to stop the fight. Let's go get another glove. Let's put it on the fighter's hand, and let's get the fight going, again. You're going to always have to deal with these type of situations. They're going to come up. We get, shorts that tear. I've actually had, guys, grab a guy's shorts so much that, it was, he had basically, I would say, athletic jock underneath, and then his testicles are sticking out because his cup had been moved, and it's like, really? Oh my God! Stop! And you got.
This has got to be a local.
Got to take care of stuff.
This has got to be
a local show.
Of course.
Oh yeah, but you're going to see those things, and they happen, and it's these are things you're going to have to deal with because they do happen, and you got to just take your time. Don't get all freaking flustered over it. Call that time, and let's get everything worked out the right way, and then let's get the fight going again.
All right. So, what's your craziest story? The weirdest thing that you've seen refereeing fights? Can be boxing, can be Muay Thai, kickboxing, glory, UFC, it doesn't matter. I have a lot less experience, but I did referee a decent amount of boxing, especially in the 1990s when I was a kid and I would take any card for $50 and drive 6 hours to work it. So my story might be yours. I can go first or you can go first. Weirdest, oddest thing you've ever seen as a ref?
I don't know, oddest. There's all kinds of odd things that have occurred, in fights and stuff. One of my favorites that made me laugh that I enjoyed was there was a ring card girl, and she had the shirt was like in that how there's under boob, you don't have not the over boob, you got the under boob. She got her shirt in that under boob thing, and she's walking around the little catwalk around the thing with her card, and obviously she had tape. Well, the tape gave way because of the pressure on this thing, and so one boob pops out, and she's walking, and the fans are going crazy now because there's a boob sticking out, which guys are like, you. And the more that they cheered, the more she was happy. She didn't even realize it. And she just keeps walking, being happy until she finally got all the way around. The guy who was her helper is like, oh, no. And he's telling her. And then she's all mortified. But I thought that was classic. I enjoyed that one a lot.
I think I got you on that. All right. So this is in the late 1990s. It's before the ABC. Before athletic commissions in most states, especially in the Midwest where I was refereeing boxing. So I get a call, and this is when the promoter would call you and book you. And I didn't even have a license. I would say, I don't think I had a license. I didn't have a license. You just were a referee, and they would call you and pay you your $50 or $100 and work. So they give us an address. It's in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm a lifelong Kansas City, and John, I had no idea where we were going. So we get there downtown, walk in. I don't know if you ever saw Trading Places, but in Trading Places where Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy and Dan Aykroyd are sitting around with all the other old white people and they're smoking cigars and reading newspapers. It was like one of those types of places I didn't even know existed in the world. So they bring everybody up, the other referee, myself, the trainers, cutmen, boxers, put us in a room, stay there. They bring us down. We walk into a banquet hall. There are 3 long tables. There are probably about 200, 250 guys in there, all white guys, all smoking cigars, have the boxing ring set up, 3 fully naked ring card girls. And that was our show. My timekeeper was hammered drunk. I mean, hammered drunk. They had Little People Pro Wrestling on the card, which I refused to referee. I said, absolutely not. I'm a lifelong kayfabe guy. I know what happens. The referee gets kicked in the ass and they do a sunset flip on him. Not going to happen to me. Full on. But my takeaway was, I remember the cage side physician. I have never seen anybody more excited to see 3 naked women. And I thought, wow, you're an MD. Did you not see any of this in your training?
Yeah, but see, you got to figure out. See, man, doctor, everyone thinks that, being a doctor is this thing. Oh, you get to see naked women and stuff. Yeah, you do. But most of them you're going to see you don't want to see. Let's be honest. Most of them are not going to be the 9s and 10s. They're going to be the 3s and 4s.
So at one point in this show, and this is where the referee would collect the scorecards and take it over to the table, and I've always taken myself way too seriously, and especially when I was in my early 20s refereeing, I took myself way, way too seriously. And of course, I'm bending over. I'm an easy target. Here comes the naked ring card girl, one of the 3, starts grinding on me from behind. Crowd loves it. I didn't love it because, again, I take myself too seriously. End of the night, after all the fights, we had a worked fight on the show, which always delighted me because I was never told. So I don't know why I didn't enjoy this experience, but I think I just got caught up in the moment. End of the show. I want to say this tastefully, John. So the 3 naked ring card girls, let's say it was full contact karate, if you know where I'm going with that. I know we have some kids who listen to the program, so I'll be as tasteful as I can. Wink, wink. Full contact karate at the end of the show, to which the cage side or the ringside physician was even more excited. And then I got in my car and drove home.
Oh, the glorious world of combat sports.
Local shows. But, when you're working as a referee, the local shows, regardless of the combat sport, that's where you really learn. Because by the time you get to the big time, I got there as a commentator. I never did as a boxing referee. But, John, you know this. When you get to the major shows, it's easy because lights aren't going to go out. Naked ring card girls aren't going to be grinding on you. The cage isn't going to break. The ring ropes aren't going to collapse. You've seen it all.
You know what? You're right. There's certain things about working the bigger shows. It's like, you don't have to worry about a lot of the little things that happen on the smaller shows. But, the one thing I tell referees all the time, or judges, when you're going to go do those shows, those are great. Those are your learning experiences. That's where you get your feet wet. That's where you see these problems and you learn how to deal with them. And it's also, you need to take those fights seriously. I know, look, it doesn't matter if I'm doing a UFC or if I go to a local show in California and, do a, small time, even amateur, to that fighter. That's the biggest fight of their life at this point. And you need to respect it and have the same, outlook as far as you need to do the right things. You need to be, making the right calls. You need to take it as seriously as you can because that fight is so important to that fighter. It should be important to you.
The great Mills Lane, I remember him telling me that he was interviewed. He was doing a show somewhere in Nevada. It may have been like Pahrump, Nevada, or small town Nevada. And he was asked, you do world title fights in Las Vegas and Lake Tahoe and Reno. Why do you work these shows? This isn't important. And he said, you know who this is important to? The 2 guys who are fighting. This is the most important fight in the world. This is their world title fight. And if it's important to them, then it's important to me. And I've always had that philosophy as a commentator. I try just as hard. I spend just as much time with the prelim fighters as I do with the main event fighters, the main card fighters, the world title fight fighters. There aren't different levels. I can't commentate at a lower level. You can't referee at a lower. Yeah, it's just a different fight, but it's important to them. In the grand scheme of the sport, maybe it's not important, but in the grand scheme of their lives, it's utterly important. It's all encompassing.
That's the whole thing. And you look and you go, I go to shows and people go, what are you doing here? Right? I go, refereeing fights. But why? It's like, because it's important. It's important to these guys. You know what? It does not matter that, it's a small show with fighters that most people don't know. It's an important fight to them, and I've been asked to be there, and I took it. I took it as an assignment, and I'm happy to be there, and I'm happy to try to do the best job I can do.
John, I'm glad you brought that up because I know you don't promote yourself. You're a really humble guy, but you work a lot of quote unquote mom and pop shows, non-televised shows, house shows, and it shows your passion, your dedication, your love for this sport. You do this in MMA, you do this in kickboxing, Muay Thai, and boxing. I think you're right. People just expect to see you on these major shows. And wow, why is John McCarthy here at this Ramada Inn with 800 people in the ballroom? You're there because you love it.
That's it. I love MMA. I love boxing. I love kickboxing. I love combative sports. And I'm happy that I'm able to be a part of all of them. And if it's, a show where I don't have, a major show scheduled already, because, I go with my schedule. I'm as honest and open as I can. It's a matter of whoever schedules me first, that's what I go with. If I have a small mom and pop show, that I'm scheduled to do, and the UFC, contacts me and says, hey, we have this show, or the athletic commission says, hey, we have this UFC that's coming. We want you to do it. And if I already have something scheduled, I say, I'm sorry, I'm already scheduled. I don't change it over and say, oh, I'm going to call the small show and drop them because it's a bigger show. I go with the first person that's on my schedule because that's what's right in my mind. That's what I think is fair. And I don't change it. And I'm happy to do the small show because I'm happy that I just get to do the thing that I love to do, and that's referee combative sports.
John, last point on all this, the fact that I was there for my buddy, Caveman David Rickles at Evolution Fighting Championship, hanging out. You go to shows, you work them, we go as fans. We're all about supporting local fighting. Support the major stuff, but support the local stuff, because that's 98% of the combat sports industry. The 2% is what you see on television. As a fan, as somebody who works in the industry, as a referee, as a judge, that's where you want to be as much as possible.
Yeah, because that's where that's where you see the guys that you're going to see in the future. That's where you see this kid that you go, oh my God, this kid's good. And, you have an idea of these people when they come up and they make the bigger shows. You've already seen them. You've already worked with them. You know something about them. And that only helps you later on. That's what this sport's about. When you get to the point, where you're the George St. Pierre, the Anderson Silva, the Chuck Liddell up at that high point, that's awesome. And that's the people that, the average fan is looking towards and wanting to see. But there's a ton of guys that are coming up that ladder. And, the guys that are climbing that ladder that you get to see in those small shows, if you're a fan and you get to go to those shows, it's great to see those guys fight at an early time in their career, because then you can sit there and go back and say, dude, I was watching that guy when he was fighting nobodies, at the local, bar or whatever, wherever the fight was held. It's really part of, being part of this sport. And it's awesome just to say that you saw that guy in his early fights.
And I will just loop it around by saying this. So with David Rickles, so I think 4 years ago, I was refereeing the boxing part of a split boxing MMA show at a bar with maybe 600 people there in Kansas. And on the card in the main event portion of the MMA was David Rickles. And I watched him and I talked to him backstage. I was already doing Bellator at this point. I think it was 2010 or 2011. And I texted our matchmaker, Sam Kaplan, that night. And I said, you got to look at this guy. The story is Sam Kaplan looked at him. He signed him. Rickles won a tournament, fought for a world title. And now he's one of Bellator's top lightweights and biggest stars. Again, that was at a little bar in Kansas on a very small show, which Rickles maybe made $500.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many guys that I have talk to a certain matchmaker of organizations, be it, the UFC or Bellator, and said, hey, you need to look at this guy, because, that's how these things happen. And, if you're a matchmaker, if you're a Rich Chow with Bellator, you're Joe Silva or Sean Shelby with the UFC, you're getting people contacting you a lot, but there's certain people you're going to start to trust about, hey, they told me this guy's good, so I'm going to look. And it doesn't mean that they're going to sign him, but it does mean that, they're getting their eyeballs are being put on him and they get a little bit of knowledge about him, and then they can make a determination. But that's how this works. And, it just takes seeing someone in that small show that all of a sudden you see something special in him, and oh, this is a guy that's going to be really good. And he may not be ready right at this moment. I get people all the time saying, do you think I'm ready? And I'm honest with them, saying, look it. Not right now. You're not. But you're getting there, and this is what you need to do. And you give them some advice. You try to tell them. You try to give them some some props as far as what they're doing, but you have the ability sometimes to help change people's lives. And what you did for Dave Rickles changed his life. And that's a guy that deserves it, because that's a hell of a fighter.
And if nothing else, fans listening to this program now know, go to local fights and there's a good chance you'll see some form of round card girl nudity, right, John? Based on our experiences anyway.
Yeah. And I thought about it. I should tell her. And then I thought to myself, no, I shouldn't. I'm just wrong.
We are back with you next week for an all-new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And, of course, you can go straight to our website, listen to this week's show, listen to our archives and all future shows, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter @podcastmma for this show, and for us personally, @JohnMcCarthyMMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember, we want you to spread the word. Please help us out, grow this, become the #1 podcast worldwide in combat sports. This is very much your show as much as it is ours. For Big John McCarthy, our producer Chris Lakin, and our entire crew, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.